Hey, hi everybody, and welcome to our Immersive UK webinar today. I'm joined by Simon Portman from Marks & Clerk and Matthew Clark from LaPlaya Insurance, and we are going to be talking about the implications of COVID on the future of IP insurance and cybersecurity, and discussing like legal issues and potential issues with insurance going forward as we come out of lockdown. We're not going to have any presentations today. It's just going to be a conversation between Simon, Matthew, and I, and an opportunity for you to ask your own questions. So please ask whatever you feel, pop them in the Q&A box, and I will ask them as we go through. If you have any technical issues, put them in the chat, but put all the questions in the Q&A box. All right, so we're gonna just start a little bit and talk about like where we're at right now in this whole COVID situation, and just talk about where the industry is at a little bit for immersive, and some opportunities and what's gonna happen going forward. So guys, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I think we'll kick off by, I know we're all working from home now. I wanna just kind of ask like how has this affected both of you and doing your jobs in law and insurance?
Well, on a personal level, it's been a challenge being stuck at home with 3 teenagers, I'll admit. And I am starting to miss the feel of being in an office environment with a team of people around me. It makes you realise how much you miss that kind of environment. But in terms of a business sense, being in insurance has been pretty busy because, as you can imagine, we've had a lot of people looking to make claims on their insurance policies in relation to COVID. So that's kept us extraordinarily busy. But given that we're a business that does a lot of electronic trading anyway, it hasn't impacted us in a practical sense adversely too much. So we can still quote and bind insurance for clients remotely. We can deal with claims electronically. No commuting means there's been a lot more time to spend talking to clients and partners. And any money we're saving on not commuting is being pumped into AdWords campaigns and marketing campaigns like there's no tomorrow. So that's supporting our SEO business channel. And I find that working from home just gives me more time to think, more headspace to think, which has enabled me to kick off a few projects that perhaps I wouldn't have thought about or wouldn't have started so soon if it weren't for COVID. But that's my own experience. I'll love to hear what Simon's challenges have been.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty similar. As this is a VR session, I thought it would be good to put a science fiction reference in there. The author behind all this talked about the cozy catastrophe. In other words, after the world ends, people go back to a simple, rustic existence. And living in an English village on lockdown, my experience has been quite like that. I'm all too aware that I'm a lot luckier than many people, so I certainly don't want this to go on forever. And like Matthew, we were pretty keyed up to work remotely and from home anyway. On the work front, some of our clients have, there are clients in things like restaurants, food and drink who are suffering a bit. Also those with overseas customers and suppliers are affected by the squeezing on the international supply chain. But on the other hand, we've been really busy with healthcare companies that are doing ventilator manufacture, test kit distribution, and vaccine development. And obviously, and this is the subject of this talk to a great point, the VR companies are really coming into their own.
That was actually my next question, which was how are immersive tech companies faring compared to other companies you work with?
I think that, pretty well. They were preparing anyway for virtual and remote interactions. So, they're saying, well, now everyone has to do it, and you can see the traction. I think where there are, a few difficulties they're encountering, and Matthew may agree with this, some of them are things that are affecting all companies, and some of them are things that were affecting VR anyway. So headset purchases have, as you can imagine, gone through the roof, but there is now a shortage and they're still quite uncomfortable. IT departments, who would normally be the people that you're going to, if you want to persuade people to take on more XR, are really busy trying to get mass home working to work. And also there is a worry that R&D budgets might, as a result of the current crisis, suffer. I hope not, because that's what happened after the credit crunch, and it was a bit short-sighted. In America and Europe, a lot of companies cut their R&D budgets. In Asia, they didn't, and they were a lot better off for it. I think also we're all aware of bandwidth problems, and although there are a lot of virtual events going on now, they can still experience some audio problems. But I think those are problems going to get ironed out. How about you, Matthew?
Yeah, I would agree. Our clients are standing up pretty well to it. We particularly have a client base that's private equity or VC funded. So a lot of them had gone through rounds of funding sensibly before it kicked in, or fortunately before it kicked in. So well funded to kind of bear the brunt of it. I think also that we're talking about businesses here that are tech savvy, right? So they're already kind of fairly well equipped to switch to a virtual model fairly easily. So remote working, the use of co-working spaces has helped to keep overheads on a flexible basis. I guess some of the particular challenges that some have been in relation to how they communicate with each other over their new wider network. And for some businesses that we look after who have physical studios and do shoots and video shoots and things, it's been quite tricky for them, obviously, because they've not been able to get out and about and do that, or indeed use their own studio safely. So those have been some of the challenges that we've had, but we're using the opportunity to train and retrain our own staff. There's a enormous opportunity for immersive technology businesses in training at the moment. Anyone not taking advantage of that is missing a trick. We're seeing a lot of our clients pivot towards that.
Actually, today, I don't know if anyone saw the announcement there, but HTC5 just solidified a strategic partnership with the Engage platform, which is Immersive Education, who owns that, and they've invested $3 million into that platform. So that's like a really massive opportunity for them, and I know lots of other platforms are really taking advantage of this moment. Do you know of any other particular opportunities that both either of you see from your vantage point with your
clients? I mean, there are, I think, a few distinct examples that we're aware of that demonstrate what the opportunities are. I mean, obviously, everyone is now living in Zoom or Microsoft Teams or LifeSize, like we are at the moment. But the VR meeting facilities out there are even more immersive and engaging, and they're getting real traction now. So you can not only communicate and give presentations, but you can actually design products and have scenario simulations in an immersive 3D environment. I mean, a good example is last year, back in the olden days when we were allowed to actually travel and meet people. I went to see a Helsinki company called Glue. I took part in a virtual meeting there. I got to take a bit of 3D furniture apart that was floating in the virtual air and redesign it. And then I was able to go out on the balcony and look at the panoramic view of the Alps that I was in. I think also another good thing about VR meeting is some people are a bit worried about the privacy of Zoom, so they don't really like people seeing their house maybe, or they don't really want to enable the camera. So what they're going to like doing in that regard is the fact they can have a virtual background and maybe avatars.
Although that's a really interesting point you bring up about security, because we're worried about security on things like a Zoom platform, but what about in VR meeting spaces? I know like the security piece is still a big question mark for a lot of people and platform owners. So do you have any thoughts on that, and any other risks that companies should be looking out for?
Yeah, well, certainly, I beg your pardon, Simon, you go ahead.
No, I was just about to say, this is one for you, I think.
Okay. Absolutely, this is I think the whole privacy and data security piece has come into its own in the last couple of months. certainly we have seen, and I think at this point, if I can get the technology to work, I will just show you one quick slide, which I hope everybody can see, because it's a fair bit to say on this, and it's tricky to get it all down unless you can see it, but here we are. So I'd split the risk elements so far as the insurable elements are concerned between businesses and people. So a lot of the fallout from COVID has obviously meant that businesses are having to suddenly pivot towards remote working. The degree to which companies can do that safely in relation to network security issues it varies depending upon the business and their size and their ability to pivot safely in this way. So we're seeing a lot of businesses obviously remote working, people using their own device perhaps to tap into the company network. These all create vulnerabilities that perhaps weren't there before. So we've seen a spike in cybercrime, for which there's a specific form of insurance called cyber insurance. So insurers are reporting a defined spike in certain types of cyber fraud and cybercrime, which they're seeing quite severe, as you can see in relation to some of this activity. The other issue that we're looking at is that we've got a lot of clients who can't access their premises or shut down studios. So you have to be careful at looking at what your insurance policy says about that. If you have unoccupied premises with all of your kit and equipment and everything else in there, you need to be in contact with your insurers or brokers to make sure that there's continuous coverage on that. We're also seeing people, frankly, anxious about being able to deliver on their contractual obligations, both in terms of the technology and the services they're providing to their counterparties, but also they're anxious about other companies that they're connected with that owe them obligations, being able to perform under their contract. So this can have a knock-on effect in all sorts of areas, but in particular in professional indemnity or errors and omissions insurance for businesses involved in this sort of technology space. So we're encouraging a lot of our clients here to keep in touch with us on this, to reach out to us and their lawyers before things become problematic, so that we can advise them and help them to steer a course through any contractual issues. Of course, directors of businesses as well have continued duties. It doesn't stop with COVID. So as a director of a business, your obligations and your duties of care to staff and so on are continuous. How do you do that when you can't meet with your staff? You can't physically interact with them and they're remote to you. So all these are issues that we're focused on at the moment. The people risk is starting to overtake the business risk now that we're a couple of months into this. So we've got a lot of clients who are concerned about how they unlock and return to work. What is a health and safety compliant office? What does that look like? Of course, if you've got people who are used to working as parts of teams that have suddenly been consigned to working from home for a few months, what sort of anxieties and challenges is that throwing up for them personally? As a director or an employer, your duty of care towards them doesn't end when at the office door. You have to look after these people all the way through. And insurance has a role to play in all of this. So a competent insurance broker should be ahead of the game here and advising their clients on how to steer a course through all of this, pulling in where necessary additional expertise from people like Simon on the legal side to make sure that things aren't being missed that could come back and bite you later. So at that point, Simon, over to you in terms of what you're seeing as the impact on risk.
Yeah, I think to pick up on a couple of points there, yeah, we are seeing people worried about being able to perform contracts, worried about the other side not being able to perform them. And there are a lot of seminars knocking about on the internet at the moment about how you can get out of a contract because of breach or force majeure or frustration. However, what I would say is it's probably better to see if you can renegotiate these contracts and find some way to adapt them to the current situation, because remember, if you get out of them, you're probably going to need these contractual partners when we're out of this crisis. And if you've had some really bad dispute that's left a nasty taste in your mouth, you may not be able to do that. Also, picking up on the mental health challenges, as we all know, companies like Oxford VR on developing technology that is having an increasing role in treating mental health. And now with people at home, companies that can treat you in that way without you having to go to a healthcare professional, or the healthcare professional come to you, are all the more important.
Absolutely. And one thing, just before we move on, if I can switch to the next slide, I have a special offer to make for everyone who's listening, indeed any member of Immerse or anybody who's connected with the network. At the moment, as I say, we're seeing a spike in claims for cyber-related breaches and data breaches and cyber attacks and so on. We can't offer free insurance, but we can offer a 3-month free registration to a cyber breach response service, which is an online platform which would help you if you think you've suffered a cyber breach or a data breach, to determine how that happened, to remediate that, to triage it for you, to offer any guidance and support to hold your hand through that process and help you recover. And if you did need any further services such as legal advice or IT forensics and things like that, they can provide those to you at a discounted rate. So it's completely free and without obligation. You don't need to give your credit card or anything silly like that. There's no obligation to buy any insurance, but it's only available until the end of the month. So do please get in quick if that's of interest to you. Any business in the UK that's got less than 250 staff can apply for that. And if you're interested in doing that, then please do message me afterwards. Here's my contact information. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic offer. We have a question here from someone asking, have premiums gone up on insurance premiums, and are insurance companies amending new policies?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is yes, and yes, because as you've probably seen in the press, there's been some insurers in particular, Hiscox seems to be one in the frame at the moment, who've caught some bad press for declining to pay business interruption claims to their policyholders. Now, I don't want to get into the rights and wrongs of whether or not things are covered specifically, because that will depend upon the individual policies concerned. But insurers are being hammered and have been hammered. The Lloyd's of London CEO was out just last week saying that the cost of COVID is already more than 9/11. So the US insurance market has also said that they expect the total losses across all the different types of insurance that is affected by this to be in excess of $100 billion. So this is going to be the biggest insurance market loss of all time. And insurers, as a result of that, have been asked to recapitalize, unsurprisingly, by regulators. So in effect, the one simple way of doing that is to increase their premiums, their prices, right? So I think we're already seeing that starting to come through, particularly on things like travel insurance, which has taken a real battering. So yeah, unfortunately, insurance is going to be more expensive to acquire in the future.
Do you either of you have any thoughts on, when we get out of this, especially for the immersive sector, events and sharing headsets is a big question for people, hygiene, what's the duty of care to people who come to the experiences maybe at LBEs, or even in a company, for example, like if you're rolling out a large scale immersive training solution and the headsets are available across the company, are the owners of the businesses going to be at risk for having an experience in a public setting, or?
Well, I think the owner's going to have to take reasonable care. And I think this is a challenge in practical terms. Everyone is going to have to work their way through. And XR companies and the use of headsets, either within an organisation or at an event, is no different from the need to cope with catering at events, people touching the door handles and whatever. So I think it's going to be a combination of more social distancing and coming up with sanitizers that work on surfaces. And I actually have a client at the moment that's working on one of those at the moment. But I think it'll be a while, and yet it might be something for VR events. It might be a case of bring your own headset, or it's a longer queue because you're waiting for the headset to be cleaned before you have a go. But, you know, these are challenges logistically that any organisation is going to face in terms of people doing stuff within it or at events.
Absolutely. I think the challenge here is for businesses is going to ensure that their liability insurance responds if somebody does become ill or injured arising from attendance at an event and use of equipment. That's a given. So how do you achieve that? That's quite tricky, as the education sector is currently experiencing what does safe look like. And there's going to be no silver bullet for this. It's going to come down to, as Simon says, what's prudent and sensible and reasonable in the circumstances. And I sense that businesses that get this wrong because they're not putting enough effort into that could find that liability comes their way. And insurance here has a role to play, because your insurance company may well be able to provide some advice around health and safety that's specific to your industry sector. So again, reach out to them, reach out to your broker and ask for specific advice on that sort of stuff, because it could help not only help you avoid liability, but prove that you're risk aware and managing your risks more proactively, making you a more insurable proposition further on.
At the moment, of course, the reason why virtual events are taking off is because you don't have that danger of infection. And there's and virtual collaborations as well. And you've got the ventilator challenge UK consortium with companies like Ford and Airbus and Siemens using AR technology in the HoloLens to capture the assembly steps and processes involved in building ventilators, but no one's in a lab together, so they're not going to catch anything. Equally, you know, there was a big impact made this year in Helsinki, which is probably one of the most networked cities in the world, and they held their annual May Day concert virtually. They've already got a virtual Helsinki city centre, and for this they had 700,000 viewers tuning into the event, which is nearly 12% of the population, and 50,000 of them adopted avatars. So until we get this worked out, immersive technology is offering a safe alternative.
That's really interesting. Have you had any experiences with any of the immersive companies you work with who have come to you around issues like getting, you know, IT support, like they're, you know, the head of security in their company, like any pushback from companies on not wanting to use it because of network security, for example?
I haven't any more than anything else. Oddly, I think it seems that people are less paranoid about it than they were about the cloud when that first started being used, even though you know the cloud in terms of being hacked is relatively safe. I mean, it does mean that people have to make sure that, you know, technically their hardware and software is secure, and a lot of companies that are getting into the sector don't realise also that insofar as they may end up processing personal data, particularly if they have a medical use, and that's going to include medical data, which is sensitive personal data, there is a heavy regulatory burden to both control access to that and what they do with it. And I think companies are beginning to become more aware of this sort of thing.
Absolutely. We had a risk issue of a slightly different nature, which is actually more one in your comfort zone, Simon, which was a customer who wanted to create their own sort of cardboard cutout tool that you could slap your iPhone into and then have your own self-created device. And we had to tell them that they probably, before they do that, need to take some advice from an IP lawyer on whose toes they might be treading on in doing so. They thought that they were being very clever and simply pivoting and taking advantage of a new way of doing things, but those sorts of face mask devices are already covered by a lot of design rights that I know.
Yeah, I think there is still a bit of a naivety in that, because a lot of these companies are run by young people who are enthusiastic, but don't necessarily understand the IP and regulatory framework. An example was a year or so ago, I attended an event in London and there was a young guy there, and he'd come up with this AR app whereby you could you know, superimposed costumes from Disney characters on footage of people you were filming on your phone. So they could go around looking like dressed as Snow White or whatever. And I said, well, have you got a license from Disney for that? What? You know, and I had to explain, and I ruined his evening. So, you know, and when you're getting to maybe not realizing that you have to have a certain amount of security in place for patient data as well, people, you know, need to wise up a bit, I think. And again, I think this highlights another danger with a lot of companies getting into new areas in the current crisis. You're getting companies moving into things like ventilator design and manufacture when they haven't done it. A lot of the distilleries and breweries have been getting into making hand sanitizer. And all that is great, but they've got to look at, have they got a license to the necessary intellectual property? Do they know what they're doing? And do they know what the regulatory framework is? Because it's a bit embarrassing if you make a ventilator or a hand sanitizer and then no one will buy it because it doesn't meet any of the standards. And then you've wasted a lot of time and money, and it's a PR own goal.
It felt like there was a moment, it almost feels like it's tapered off a little bit now, even though we're not out of this, where it almost felt like all the traditional regulations kind of went out the window because we were in such a state of panic to try and get things built and shipped and delivered that standards kind of went out the window a little bit. Go ahead, Matt.
Some of the we work with the life science clients too, and on some of those businesses, they were pivoting to help the NHS by looking at seeing what they could do with the creating not just ventilators, but some of the other elements that go into varying levels of intervention that COVID requires medically. And of course, you're right, you do need to have, there's a very stringent regulatory regime about that, which involves lots of product development, testing. There's something called clinical trials liability insurance, which you have to have that controls, that manages your liability in relation to a trial of a new medical device. The government did accelerate a lot of the groundwork that the regulators do on some of that. So I'm aware that one of the Formula One team pushed out one of these devices themselves very quickly, which was rapidly accelerated through the regulatory process. So there is a sort of meeting of the minds that the government can come some way towards speeding things up here, something that would otherwise take years to do, you know.
Yeah, I think also on the contracts and the practical front, I mean, I had a client who set up an international distribution network for test kits in about 3 weeks, and normally that would have taken months. And it was just, everything was accelerated. Well, it's amazing what you can get done when everyone is incentivized to actually get a move on.
Actually, that's funny because I have a friend actually who did a similar thing, set something up around distribution. It all happened very quickly. But I was kind of wondering, like, what kind of liability does the distributor have? Someone who's not actually manufacturing the products, but offering them.
Well, that you want to address that in the contracts. So basically, you know, if you're buying a product from another manufacturer to resell, you're going to want the warranties in there regarding the fact that it complies with spec, it is, you know, compliant with the regulations, and also use of it is not infringing any third-party intellectual property. And then equally, that manufacturer is going to want to be protected from any liability that you might incur to the customer, because, for instance, you misrepresent it when you sell it, or you damage it before you sell it on. So all of these things can get allocated in the contracts, and then the parties, if they're wise, will make sure they have the insurance cover commensurate with what their level of risk is. Yeah. What I always say, I think Matthew would agree here, whenever a client says to me, well, as a matter of fact, goes wrong because I've got insurance, I say, well, firstly, you know, I'm insured if, you know, the roof of my house collapses on someone, but I'd rather it didn't happen. You're going to look like a bad risk, and your premiums are going to go up next time. So, you know, get the insurance, but also take the advice from your insurers and your lawyers to mitigate the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, insurers, the process of acquiring the insurance, of getting quotes and purchasing the insurance, That process is called underwriting, and as part of that process, the insurers will want to know what steps you've taken. They will want to know how you've tried to exclude or limit your liability under the sort of distribution contracts that Simon was just talking about, and what onerous liabilities you may be taking on that you might be expecting to pass on to your insurers for them to shoulder. So these are all aspects that are very sort of sensible precautionary steps to take, that insurers will expect you to be taking, and unless you take them, may not give you the coverage or may not give you the breadth of coverage you want at the price you want. So I spend most of my time as an insurance broker working with people like Simon, hand in glove with clients, lawyers and legal advisors on making sure that the insurance is fit for purpose, specifically around contractual obligations. It's a huge.
Have you guys seen any kind of like really solid back to the work, back to office, I don't know, options? I feel like there really isn't any great government guidance on that, and it's a bit like everyone needs to figure it out on their own, kind of. I've seen some solutions where like these distributors, for example, of PPE and hand sanitizer and stuff like that, creating like monthly subscription packages or something for an office, so they can get in the right kind of like hygiene equipment and like a temperature checker at the door, for example. Like a lot of details there. This is just one example of like a company I know that's come up with this like subscription model for something like that. Would implementing something like that in an office or on, let's say, a film shoot, for example, where the film industry is taking a massive hit. That, I mean, same with everything that we do in XR, like mocap, volumetric capture studios, all of that's on hiatus at the moment. Like, how would that be enough, do you think, of
I think we're all feeling our way. And I mean, people have different views on how well this has been handled in each country. But I'm afraid that, you're right, up to a point. You say the governments are leaving industry and people up to a point to work it out for themselves. But I'm afraid they've just got to, governments don't have all the answers on this. There is an element to which we are all working this out for ourselves. And the extent to which a working environment becomes the right combination of safe and practical and insurable is something we're all going to be making up as we go along.
Yeah, we have some clients that are working with third-party health and safety experts, and of course, this is a very different environment that they're experiencing, so they're learning themselves as we go. So we have some clients who are healthcare sector businesses for whom this is obviously mission critical. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some of the back to work plans that they have, and they're incredibly detailed and very well thought through. Again, I'm glad that they're sharing that stuff with us, because we can share that with the insurers and use whatever expertise the insurers can bring to bear to show that we're managing the risk as best we can. So if something does kick off later, you're in a really good place to say, look, we defended ourselves by getting the best advice we could, by implementing that advice and setting ourselves up so as not to create more problems.
Because also the issue is the more complex a plan is, and they're going to have to be, the more scope there is for people to not follow it properly.
I guess there are no real standards set. You just have to try and cover your bases the best you can and make the case for yourself.
Yeah, and maybe at some point there will be, and they might be industry specific, but you've still got to prepare for the fact, like anything else, that things might just go wrong anyway, or people in your organisation or visitors to it might not follow them properly, and then it's a case of the more that you have told them what to do and monitor what they're doing, the more defendable your position is if they don't do it.
I think there was a BBC piece on this a week or two back about the utilities sector, and they interviewed some people from one of the UK nuclear power plants. And as you can imagine, it doesn't get much more mission critical than being able to ensure continuity of service in terms of a nuclear power plant and all the safety issues. Yeah. And they seem to have, as they have to, given this a depth of thought and reasoning over a longer period of time than any other sector that I've seen. So I imagine that ultimately what might come out of this is something which draws upon those kinds of industry sectors and takes
So
the
like
best.
trickle down to other industries will take kind of the lead from those ones. That's really interesting. Have you heard of anything happening for the film and TV industries in particular?
Well, we have clients that are just in
Okay.
lockdown, aren't working, and are suffering loss of revenue as a result of that, which they may or may not be insured for. So that's as black and white as it gets in my world.
Yeah, and I think that the UFC held a mixed martial arts tournament, and they with no audience, no spectators, a lot of social distancing, and not too many people in the octagon at the same time. And I don't know whether it happens, but they were going to hold it on tribal lands to get around the federal social distancing rules. So I don't know whether
You're kidding.
no, I don't know whether that's what went ahead.
That's gotta be a joke. That's horrible.
So maybe anyone wanting to film a film can do it on tribal lands as long as they take some disinfectant.
You know what? I really hope not. Actually, that makes me think about kind of the future of virtual production. I don't know if you guys saw how VR was used in the filming of The Lion King, the live action remake of The Lion King, and also The Mandalorian that Jon Favreau has been doing. Is absolutely amazing work. But essentially, it just there's like it's a whole. I think it's like the future of film production, really, because you don't really need that many people on site for it, and it doesn't require doing as many takes as you would normally do in a traditional film shoot. But then that makes me think again about like cyber breach and access to all of that data. And Matt, this cyber breach response special thing that you have here, is that only if you've had a breach happen and you need someone to look into it, or is that anyone can get it just to do like a temperature check of where they're at?
Absolutely, sign up now before you've had a breach, and then if you have one in the next 3 months, it's going to be there to help you. In a nutshell, if you've had a breach and you want to sign up to it, do so too, because you can still get that free advice. What you won't be able to access is the actual insurance, obviously, that goes along with that. So as well as the primary response service, the insurers are providing all of the liability protection, all of the coverage, the costs for your own costs in dealing with the breach. It's just the breach response service that we're offering.
And also, as I said earlier, it's better if you don't actually have to claim on your insurance. So any organisation should also have an IP and IT security policy in place, so everyone knows what they should be doing to minimise the risk, and employees should be obliged to sign up to that when they sign their employment contract. And that means something they actually read and sign, though that might mean at the moment docu-signing it, but don't put these policies on the firm intranet, because in my experience the best way to make sure that no one in your organisation ever reads something is to stick it on your intranet.
Okay. Thanks to Mitch for giving us that link about the TV and film industry.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. Yeah.
Very useful.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at that. Take a look at that after. Do any of the companies here have any particular questions? You have an excellent lawyer and insurance broker here who can explain anything you have. Any particular company questions? What if you have to like push any contract work into like that's been paid for example, into the next year? Are there any, I don't know, particular other issues that you think should be flagged around dealing with contracts and?
Well, I mean, it's a case of whether you can do that under the contract or whether that's a breach. But as I said earlier, if it is something that you can't do according to the contract, then I would advise people to try and renegotiate something. I mean, in our personal lives, a lot of us are dealing with this at the moment. It's like, am I going to get that money back for that flight or that holiday? Even if they are technically in breach and technically I'm entitled as a consumer for it, are they hanging on to it, because they need the money? Is there going to be some, compromise whereby we can just reschedule it? And this is happening with a lot of the events management as well. People who were paying to have events this year and looking at maybe, having to reschedule. So have a look at your contract, get legal advice on what your rights are under it. But unless getting out of that contract is what you need to do to survive, I would suggest trying some sort of flexibility and renegotiation, because, as I said earlier, your contractual partners you're going to be wanting to do business with when this is all over. And people are going to remember how you treated them during this.
Oh, I very much believe that. I think, people are treating their employees, people will remember who treated their employees well and who didn't in all of this.
And how your customers and suppliers treated you as well. So,
yeah.
This isn't going to last forever. So,
this is interesting. A topic has been raised that I feel like almost no one's talked about in the last few months, shockingly, is how is Brexit going to impact the UK's position? Insurance falls under services in the case of no deal, which looks very likely. Brexit's back. We forgot all about it for a couple months.
Simon, you go ahead first.
On the insurance side, I can't really comment on that. On the contract side, it's not. I think the effects on Brexit on commercial relationships are going to be to do with things like availability of staff, where your customers are, currencies, fluctuations in exchange rates, and that sort of thing. In terms of contracts, you should really be making sure that you have a contract which you can get out of on notice anyway. So if Brexit makes your contract unworkable and you're locked into it, then you should have really thought about that before you signed up to it. And it's probably going to be difficult to argue that Brexit counts as a force majeure. Also, a lot of the intellectual property rights are going to survive unaffected by Brexit. Things like the patent regime is nothing to do with the European Union. The trademark regime is up to a point. But what's going to happen with a lot of intellectual property rights is, insofar as they have a European element, they will be replaced in the UK with analogous national rights. And then gradually the case law will diverge. But I don't see that as a serious issue. I mean, an interesting thing about Brexit on the contract side was you get a lot of contracts where exclusivity was granted in a territory, and that was defined as the EU, and we might say the EU states member states from time to time, and everyone assumes that the EU would last forever and that no countries would leave, and that all that would happen maybe is that new countries would join. So I'm now saying that, if you've got a contract where the territory is the EU and you want the UK to be included in that contract moving forward, then you probably want to negotiate a side letter confirming that. Equally, moving forward, it's probably worth saying that if you define the territory as the EU, whether if a country leaves it, it's going to be included in the territory or not. And it's probably worth thinking about, what happens if long term the EU disintegrates. So it's worth putting all eventualities in there now. Yeah, I agree that we'd all forgotten a bit about Brexit as a result of this crisis. In some ways, that was a benefit of it.
And I almost forgot about
and this also.
And then the murder hornets came, and I almost forgot about COVID. But
Yeah, so I think Brexit on its own, Brexit probably merits a session on its own.
I have another couple of questions here, guys. I want to run through. One says, this is for Simon. Companies say companies are trying to cut costs to survive. Do you see many companies using IP budgets to cut cost?
Some are looking at rationalising on that front. It is difficult because, of course, insofar as your IP is a long-term investment, it would be a short-sighted thing to do. But it is difficult, and we're having conversations with clients about what they can do in terms of rationalising their IP budget. on this front, actually, we at Marks Clark have already done a separate podcast that and some articles which are dealing with this issue in a lot more detail. So I'd invite you to read those and listen to that, rather than me, going on for another half hour about what my patent attorney colleagues have said upon the subject. But yeah, it is a concern.
Is that another is that a podcast they did, or a write-up on it?
Both. I think there's a slide coming at the end of this show where we've got links to our COVID-19 portal. And if anyone wants to email me at the end of this, I could send you the link to the SoundCloud link to the podcast we had, where it was myself, a trademark attorney, a biotech patent attorney, and an electronics patent attorney, talking about what you can do with your IP portfolio in this current crisis. So anyone worried about that would definitely be well advised to listen to that session.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll share that slide at the end so you have Simon's contact information and can find that info. We have another question here. It says, will a UK holder of an EU trademark be withdrawn in case of no deal with the EU?
No, what's happening there is there is a transition to an analogous UK national right. But what you should be doing is talking to your trademark attorney about what the best policy is in that regard, because one of the things that's interesting is there are slightly different rules in terms of what obligations and rights licensors and licensees have regarding a UK trademark as opposed to a European one, so there might be some ramifications for the contracts which that trademark is subject to. Again, if you drop me a line, I can put you onto some much more detailed advice in that regard.
Oh, sorry, Matt, I thought you had anything else to add with that. So do you guys have any thoughts on any other lasting changes you think we'll have to contend with when lockdown is over?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you look at the press, there's a lot of journalists saying nothing will ever be the same again. And I'm sure they said that after the First World War and the Second World War, and a lot did go back to normal. And they said it when Princess Diana died, and they said it after 9/11, and again, a lot of things were the same after that. So I think in many respects, we won't go back to the way we were. I'm slightly cynical. I think in some ways, we will probably make the same mistakes again and reinstate the vulnerability to pandemics that got us here in the first place. I don't think that we will, we're not all going to stay inside living in a virtual world forever now. So I think that we're going to go outside and resume our normal lives gradually as much as we can. But I think insofar as this has showed us the potential and usefulness of immersive technology, we're not going to entirely kick the habit. And I think what this has done is accelerate our adoption of it.
Yeah, from my own point of view, I absolutely agree. I think there'll be businesses looking to see how they can review their strategies to see if they can take advantage of the positives that have come out of this, the cost savings involved in perhaps having smaller offices, for example, smaller footprints generally, being smarter about how they go about working. The earlier question about being tempted to take money away from budgets. There's two sides to this. So if you're going to be looking at taking advantage of some of the cost savings that you can get by being smarter about improving work practices, be sure to share that with insurers again, because that could have a negative impact if they feel that you're depending upon where you're saving the money, that's increasing the exposure to risk in some way. So we'll always work hand in glove with advisors first. But certainly in terms of the elements that we're forward-looking as an insurance broker and employee benefits provider, we're seeing a lot of people already perhaps with larger workforces asking about wellness programs, in addition to the straightforward health insurance from Bupa and so on. What wellness programs are available that can help us show that we have our employees' mental wellness at the forefront of our minds? So there are some special services there that are available through the insurance industry, and I suspect we're going to see more of that in the near future, and it'll become part of their the portfolio of those businesses going forward.
I think, yeah, to pick up on that, it struck me a lot of companies that are managing working from home okay, that, you know, are office-based, could quite easily have an office half the size and then just rotate their staff hot desking without any impact on productivity at all. And then you've got the balance of efficiency and people, the lifestyle benefits of working from home, plus the personal interaction half the time.
Yeah, and now you see big giants like Twitter saying that everyone's working from home going forward, and it's just going to be, I think, dominoes after that. It's just going to be more and more businesses that are going to be taking that option. I mean, from my point of view, what I've seen, and probably anyone here in the industry will probably relate that, you know, the interest in immersive has spiked massively. The demand for the hardware skyrocketed to a point that none of the major players could keep up, and they're still not, to be honest with you. I mean, everyone is struggling to get their hands on hardware, and that includes, you know, big people in the industry, you know, which is, you know, no one was prepared for this, obviously. And then, you know, ramping up production on hardware in, you know, Asia, you know, realistically, wasn't going to happen. So I'm hoping that, you know, the interest will continue on. I think it will. I think everyone's realizing like this is just the catalyst to the digital transformation that a lot of companies have been pushing back on, or just haven't thought enough about. So I'm hoping that, you know, after this, people will really, really run with it, and that all of the hardware manufacturers will catch up. And in the meantime, all of the security issues will also catch up, so that this stuff can kind of roll out at scale, you know, going forward in a safe way. And the hygiene standards have to catch up. So we have like the security issues, the hygiene issues, access to hardware issues. They all need to kind of like, you know, move forward, and then that's
where the holy grail is probably cheap, comfortable, accessible hardware that is self-sanitizing.
That is self-sanitizing, yeah. And secure.
So for any budding inventors out there, that is how you're going to make your millions.
That's it. You heard it here first. Great. Cool. Well, we've just obviously there's. Oh, here we go. Guys, we just put a link to the SoundCloud as well in the chat for the other podcast that Simon did on managing your intellectual property rights. And before we end, I'm just going to share my screen here. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your time, guys, as always. And let me just, can you see my screen? There we go.
Yeah, those are my contact details. Like Matthew, I've not bothered to give you the address for my office, because if you go there won't be anyone to let you in, and the police will stop you, because as interesting as Matthew and I are, coming to our office at the moment will not be viewed as an absolutely necessary journey.
Guys, it's always a pleasure. I love seeing you.
Likewise.
This has been really interesting. If anyone has any questions, reach out to any of the three of us. We'd be happy to help. And this has been recorded and will be up on the Immersive website by the end of the day. All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.